Whenever we're
Okay,
ready.
are we ready to let everybody in? So far,
Yes.
it's a small group, but we also have people now that we're live streaming. Okay, so I'm going to admit everybody who is in the waiting room. They are all. Oh, there's a lot more. Okay. Here they come. Okay.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming on. As soon as everyone is admitted, we'll begin our conversation together. We're delighted to have you with us tonight for Valley Beth Shalom College of Jewish Studies. Well, good evening, everyone. Can you hear okay? Can everyone hear? Good. I'm Rabbi Feinstein. This is Valley Beth Shalom College of Jewish Studies, where we offer university-level Jewish learning without the football teams, no fraternities, no sororities, and best of all, no term papers or exams. This year, we are talking about Israel, not the idea of Israel, the concept, not the politics and the conflicts, but the Israel that is lived. For so many of us who are passionate about Israel, who love Israel, but don't know what music Israelis listen to, don't know what books they read, don't know what art hangs on their walls, don't know what television they write, we are distanced and alienated from the lived experience of Israel. And that's a terrible shame, because the lived experience of Israel is a remarkable new Jewish culture, an amalgam of European and Eastern influences, a unique expression of the Israeli experience. And it has been our privilege to begin this conversation now. Tonight's our third session, to really begin to explore who Israelis are, what Israeli culture is, what it means to be an Israeli, and how Israelis think about the world. And so we're delighted to have all of you with us tonight. Delighted to welcome you for our learning tonight. We really hope to be in person, and maybe someday we will. But in the meantime, this is very comfortable. We can be in the comfort of our own living rooms and our own kitchens and our own offices with our own coffee, and enjoy being together in a learning atmosphere. Like to offer a very, very special thank you to Lil and Jess Beim, our dear friends who have endowed this series of College of Jewish Studies, and whose generosity and vision and leadership has made all the difference in enabling us to offer this quality of Jewish learning to so many in our community who share a love of Israel, of course, and a love of the Jewish people. So thank you to Lil and Jess. Hope you're well. And to everyone else, thank you for joining us tonight. Tonight, we're going to be looking at the world of Israeli art. And to introduce our speaker tonight, I'd like to introduce a very, very dear friend of mine who herself is a great maven of Jewish art. I'd like to ask Yona Goldberg of our community to please unmute and to introduce our speaker tonight. Yona, please. You have to unmute. That's the only thing you need to do. It's a verb that didn't exist a year ago. That works.
Is that okay?
It works.
Okay.
Please, you're on.
All right. Well, so first of all, I'd like to thank you, Rabbi Feinstein, for giving me this wonderful honor, because I think Sagi Raphael is one of the most exciting, interesting, fascinating, brilliant speaker. All about art, all about music, all about Israel. Actually, Sagi Raphael is an Israeli art historian, curator, advisor, based in Los Angeles. He had graduated from the Department of Art History at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, and several years later, he moved to Los Angeles. As a curator, Sagi Raphael had published over 30 articles in exhibition catalogs and monographs, delivered lectures about Israeli art at UCLA, USC, Tel Aviv Museum of Art, University of Laverne, Mentor College of Art in Tel Aviv, and Mount San Jacinto College in California, amongst other venues. In 2017, he founded Israeli Art in Los Angeles. This is an independent initiative for cultural cross-pollination between Southern California and Israel. Since 2019, he has been lecturing on Israeli art at the American University in Bel Air, California. And that's where I met him. My life changed when I met him, because he has an ability to take you and speak to you and cross-pollinate and bring in from all our vantage points that we hadn't even thought about the most interesting and fascinating aspects of Israeli art. It's quite amazing to think that really we only can think about 75 years of Israeli art. Of course, there were Israeli artists before that, but the state was only founded in 1948, and I'm sure he's going to give you a background. So I'm not even going there. As I said, he is just a most gifted, talented teacher, lecturer, curator, and storyteller about Israeli art specifically. But he appears to know and work with everyone in the art world, not only Israel, Europe, South America, every country. He's been to Japan to curate exhibitions there too. The artists love him and respect him, not only for the breadth of his knowledge, but also because he is a great mentor for them, and especially for emerging Israeli artists. Today in Israel, despite the perplexing background that we find, we do have so many opportunities to look at the panoply of a very modern Israeli art scene in a very exciting way. So without any more words from me, let me introduce you to my friend, mentor, Sagi Raphael. Thank you. Sagi.
Thank you so much for this very moving introduction. I'm very, very honored, and thank you so much to you, Yona, for first of all introducing me to Valley Bet Shalom and to Rabbi Stein and to Alana. And it's been my pleasure, to learn with you about Israeli art in the last kind of 2-3 years that we've been together at the American Jewish University. Thank you, Rabbi Feinstein. Thank you to Alana for inviting me. I want to share my screen. So just a sec. Wow. So first of all, I think that this is a very interesting approach that Valley Bet Shalom is taking at the moment to get to know the real Israel. I'm only one Israeli, and there are many ways to be an Israeli, so we should keep that in mind. The title of the lecture tonight is The Rise of the Overlooked, Israeli Art Now, but I always prefer to give a historical background just to put things in context, and not just in the Israeli context, but in kind of an international perspective. So I would start, maybe I should say the presentation, it has a lot of images and a lot of themes. We might not get to talk about all of them in depth, but at least some of it. I think that one of the main conflicts that the state of Israel and the Israeli culture have been dealing with since even before Israel was founded officially in 1948 is what is Israel? Is Israel an Eastern country because it is situated in the Middle East? Or is it a Western country that looks at European culture, that is looking at the USA, that wants to be kind of Western, wants to be American, wants to be European? So what is it? It has like an identity conflict. Is it East or West? Is it both? To bring it close to home, I'm thinking about what does it mean to be American? Is there one way to be American? America is a melting pot, just like the State of Israel was established by definition. The State of Israel was created in order to be a melting pot of Jews from all sorts of places with all sorts of circumstances. And, in the United States, we have Chinese communities and Irish and Italians and Mexicans and Russians. Do we expect, or who actually expects all of these people, all of these immigrants, first generations, second generations, third generations, who really expects them to be identical under this title of American? So I will continue drawing parallel lines between American culture and European culture to Israel, because I think that there are many, many similarities. I'm going to start, this is not Israel, but this is the Levant, this is the Middle East. When Europe started digging and discovering ancient histories, and there is a term that is called the lure of the Orient. And there is something that is very much embedded kind of in the identity of the State of Israel to this day, especially in the way that it markets or brands itself to the foreign eye, if it's the American Jews and if it's, anybody who is outside of Israel. The lure of the Orient is the fascination of the non-Easterns by the East. For example, the French intellectuals and painters, or the British or the Germans that came to Morocco, they came to the Holy Land, they came to Egypt, and they were fascinated by these exotic creatures that were kind of untouched by civilization, untouched by modernism or by industrial culture. So they were sensual. They were kind of, my connection is unstable. Okay, hopefully it will be okay. They were sensual in their behavior. They were sensual in the way that they looked. Everything was very colorful. And it's a very stereotypical way, of course, to see the Orient. This is an example of the Women of Algeria by Delacroix. There were many European artists that were fascinated by it. But the perception of the Orient also kind of maintains a hierarchy between the high and the low, the intellectuals and the non-intellectuals, those that need to be in leading positions, and those that they are only capable of cleaning toilets, for example. I'm giving this example because it is very much relevant to Israeli culture, where especially, in the 30 years, there were Ashkenazi and there were Mizrahi. And the Ashkenazi were those that were in the hierarchy above, and the Mizrahi were meant to be at the bottom. The stereotypical way of looking at the Orient was coined as Orientalism by Palestinian scholars, Palestinian American even, because he taught in the United States, Edward Said, and kind of revolutionized how we see colonialism and how we actually even perceive culture in general. Another observation that I would like to bear in mind is what Friedrich Nietzsche coined as Apollonian characteristics and Dionysian characteristics. Thinking, I'm using these terms in order to kind of make a parallel between Ashkenazi and Mizrahi. We can follow them, we can trust them. They are worthy of being in leading positions. But those that are Dionysians, like the Mizrahi in a way, are very authentic, and they let themselves go, and they're kind of a lot of fun to be with, and the god of wine, and the god of kind of ecstasy and parties. And I feel like these two kind of very dichotomy characteristics can make us understand the polarity, the polars in the Israeli society between the Ashkenazi and the Mizrahi. Thinking about Zionism, we think about it as a white movement of white Jews in general, of course, not completely, but visually, if we think about Israeli culture and the way that Zionism manifested itself at its beginning, we can think about Herzl for example, here as Moses, in a very muscular form and physique, very much European. This is inspired by Art Nouveau and was created by Ephraim Moshe Lilian. So this is kind of the new Zionist that we want to create in the new Jewish land, which is going to be the state of Israel. This is an official postcard or invitation for the 5th Zionist Congress in Basel in 1901. And what we can see here is kind of a Jewish angel who is white and maybe blonde even, with the Star of David on its chest, kind of pointing at the old Jew that is trapped in these thorns and guiding him to the east. The east is the place where the Jew will gain redemption. Instead of kind of being passive in Europe or in East Europe, he's going to be active in the future state of Israel. So if that was kind of an Ashkenazi visualization, we have the Yemenite, who is the dark-skinned Jew and is considered to be, more religious, less academically educated, and kind of not at the top of the social hierarchy in this evolving and emerging society. We have a photograph here from Bezalel. Bezalel was established in 1906, and it is considered to this day the official date or birthday of the Israeli art history. Although today we know Bezalel as an academy for arts and design, it was actually kind of a place that gathered workshops kind of use the talents and the traditions that people had in order to create merchandise to sell first of all, to give them some employment, but also to market this emerging new culture in Palestine back then, at the beginning of the 20th century, for other people to buy and support the Zionist movement. So they bought it in the United States and they bought it in Europe. And the Yemenites, they were what is now called like natural workers. What do they have to do instead of just sitting in the synagogue all day? We can use their knowledge of their traditions, and they can make, and we can kind of extend their knowledge. So in a way, we provide them work, right? And in exchange, we are going to help them, instead of getting their tradition lost, we're going to help spread it internationally. Are we going to give them a percentage out of sales? Are we going to give them a minimum wage? They kind of should be thankful for us giving them employment. That was kind of the approach back then. And again, we're getting back to this idea of the exotic Yemenite, of the exotic dark-skinned object, not a subject, an object, because this is not a person, this is a stereotype of the Mizrahi, of the Yemenite. We can see the white artists, students, painting this exotic model, was actually called a gypsy back then, not even a Yemenite. These are some examples for what was created in Bezalel. Of course, by the way, the workers in the workshop did not sign their work. Therefore, it wasn't, their artistry wasn't acknowledged, really, right? They were, employees in a factory of Bezalel, except for Yechia Yamini, this artist on the right, that did sign his work, and therefore this is how we know some of his creations to this day. The fascination by the Orient was very popular in Palestine back then by the Jews, and we can see, for example, in Abraham Soskin's photo studio back then, the first photography studio in Tel Aviv, how we can see West European Jews that immigrated to Palestine dress up as local people. And again, it's not just being patronizing towards the Orient. I really do think that they were fascinated by it, and they thought that the locals are authentic. And if we are coming from all sorts of other places, other cultures, and we want to create a new identity, start from scratch in a way and create something that is new, but also that connects us to this new place, we need to assimilate somehow. How? We're going to look at the locals and see how they behave and take the good things out of it. So these are some examples of what is called kind of a Zionist Orientalism. Of course, there was also this understanding or desire to connect the new Jew in Palestine to biblical times, and by that create this very long historical connection between how this land was owned or populated by Jews in biblical times, and it is going to be populated by Jews now, and it's a proof that our place is here on this land. By the way, this fascination by exoticism of locality is not continued for many, many years, even to this day. I am bringing some examples. In the 60s, there was a fashion brand called Maskit, and then now another one, Rikma by Rosie Ben Yosef. And this desire to kind of identify what is Israeli fashion, or even today we think, what is Israeli art? Can Israeli art be art for art's sake? Can it be just an abstract painting? Or does it need to deal with politics? Does it need to deal with Israeli societies, with Israeli conflicts? What is Israeli? So Rosie Ben Yosef thought that the Bedouin embroideries and fabrics kind of show locality, therefore Israeli fashion. And in a similar way to how the Yemenites in Bezalel kind of used the Yemenite traditions in order to make money and sell it to Jews worldwide. This way, also, Rosie Ben Yosef kind of is saying the Bedouins, who knows them? The lady in New York doesn't know them. The lady in Beverly Hills doesn't know the Bedouins, doesn't know their fabrics. But if we're going to take this community that give them money, they can be, employed and kind of be self-sustained. And also kind of let the world enjoy their beautiful fabrics and beautiful embroideries. In today's world, we can think about it as cultural appropriation, for example, right? Which is kind of very, very not politically correct, right? Only Afro-American people can have braided hair, and and it's kind of a purist approach towards culture. Another thing that is very much, I think, affects Israeli society to this day is this desire not to be friar. I don't know if anybody here knows Hebrew, but not to be a friar, not to be a sucker. What does it mean? Not to be a victim of something. No one is going to fool me. I'm not going to be a victim. Why would you be a victim? Because I was once a victim. I was the victim in East Europe. I was a victim of the pogroms. I was the victim of the Holocaust. And I am not going to be a victim again. So visually, Israeli art and Israeli culture wanted to remove themselves from this image that we see here of the exile, Galut, by Shmuel Hirschenberg, of this old Jew that cannot sit in one place because he's being chased out of its place all the time, constantly. And we're not going to be that anymore. We are going to be strong. We are going to kind of resist, and we're going to make the calls and not let anybody tell us what to do. And this is something that to this day is very Israeli. It's very Israeli in politics. It's very Israeli in society and in culture. No one is going to tell me what to do. And not just that, Israeli, if you know some Israelis, they say things very, upfront, direct, again, because I am allowed to do whatever I want. I was a victim in the past. I will not be a victim no more, and nobody's going to tell me what to do. Not the UN, not the whatever, American politicians, and so on. In those days, of course, there was, Israeli culture and society had very much a socialist roots. We can see it here with, this desire for equality. Men and women together are going to work in order to kind of create a new identity, and also very physically work in the fields, develop the cities, develop the kibbutzim, and we need every healthy person around. So therefore, we can see this group of women also kind of excited to go and work. Again, visually, we can see this is Tnuat HaPoel, directly inspired by Soviet propaganda. This is not a Yemenite Jew, right? This is someone that wants to resemble the white example of what a strong person, a strong man looks like. Again, these dichotomies: the old Jew, the new Jew. This is a poster of the Maccabi organization, an organization that was created in order to kind of show the strength in the Jews, especially in the new Jews, right? Those that are not going to be a victim again. This is the time to remind Max Nordau and his agenda about muscular Judaism. Be strong in spirit, but also very physically. And here's the same photographer representing or taking pictures of Yemenites in Palestine and Jewish soldiers. This is very much inspired by German expressionism and European expressionism, the closure and the black and white and the strong features of the face. The Yemenite, of course, is not a soldier. He's an Orthodox Yemenite and kind of represents the old Jew, especially this one. The old Jew that the new Jew doesn't want to look like him, doesn't want to behave like him, doesn't want to be kind of this old school Jew. No, we are going to remove it and create this new, strong, statuesque person. This is really, I'm speeding. We didn't get even to Israeli art now. I'm just speeding in order to give you a proper context. Machanot Olim were the temporary camps that were supposed to kind of be to accept the Olim, the immigrants that are coming to Palestine, and also after the state of Israel was already established, temporary before they go to other towns and other places. There were Ashkenazi immigrants as well, and of course Yemenite and Mizrahi Olim, but because for many reasons, one, Ashkenazis, some had, already kind of based families, economically, financially stable families of somewhat. In other places in Israel, their stay in these camps was shorter. The Yemenites and those that came from North Africa, that didn't have families or didn't have financially stable families somewhere in Israel would be there, sometimes even for a year or two. Otherwise, when the Ma'abarot, they couldn't stay there longer, it was filthy, it wasn't healthy to be there. They were sent to the peripheral cities, the emerging peripheral cities in the state of Israel. And this is kind of part of the, I would say, a conflict that that Israelis are engaged with to this day. How the Ashkenazi were in Tel Aviv and in the wealthier areas, and the Mizrahi were kind of sent away, to the peripheria where the schools have less budgets and they have less medical centers, and kind of this gap between those that deserve and those that don't deserve kind of became larger and larger. I want to say something about first generation and second generation and third generation, because this is not something that is unique to Israel. It is something that is international. When immigrants move to a new country, they often want to not rock the boat. And they kind of are grateful for any job and position that are being given, even if, it's for very slim sums of money, and kind of, just be low key and not cause any problems. Sometimes even the second generation is like that, although it depends if the second generation, how activist they are. But often the third generation that is already was born in that country and are not less Israeli or not less American than other people think, oh, my grandma or my grandfather were mistreated. And we have kind of evidence, we have stories, and this generation, sometimes even the second generation, they start to kind of dissect the history that is being written and taught and doubt it. And in Israel, it happened starting even in the mid-70s, but especially in the 90s. And I hope that I'm going to get to it. These are the Machalot Olim. Artists of that time, for example, Ruth Schloss and Naftali Bezem and others reacted to the Machanot Olim and the Ma'abarot in real time. This is following the Yemenite Aliyah in 49 and until 92. The Madonna of the Ma'abara, a Kurdish mom. So calling her the Madonna of the Ma'abara, there is something that it glamorizes it in a way, right? It's so beautiful, the Madonna, she's a saint. She's not a victim, she's a saint. So it's kind of emotionally removed from how she really feels. She becomes, instead of becoming this poor Kurdish mom that needs to breastfeed her baby in a ma'abara in very poor conditions, she becomes this saint of the ma'abara that doesn't have a name. I'm really shortened everything just to give a broad perspective. In the 70s and 5 years after the foundation of, or the emergence of the Black Panthers in the United States, there is the movement in Israel that is titled the Black Panthers, of course, a Mizrahi movement, that starts to resist the system or the systems that feel these activists and their families felt that they had been discriminated systematically. And therefore, it's not that they are poor by choice or that they are uneducated by choice, it's that it was prevented from them. It was prevented because they were located in the peripheral cities, they were located for many reasons. So this is the Black Panther, kind of a singular movement in the 70s. But I want to show that it wasn't like Mizrahi culture didn't exist. It wasn't considered high culture, or it wasn't considered to be sophisticated enough or worthy enough to be shown in newspapers or in literature, or in sometimes maybe even in art or in cinema. There are representations here and there. We can think about, I don't know, Salah Shabati, but kind of, it was always stereotypical and exotic, looking at them in an exotic manner. The Black Panther, 40 years after, were documented their portraits, 4 activists of the leaders, actually, not just activists, were documented by David Adika, who is one of Israel's most celebrated photography artists. This I'm going to skip. I'm going to talk about it next week. Do we have time? What time is it? I have 10 minutes. I wanted to say something about beauty, because it's not just art, it's also the everyday life. It's just, it's a form of appreciating or underappreciating someone by their looks. And if we think about Israel as a melting pot, I wanted to give 2 examples. One of Miss Israel, who was Ivana Kudliak, who immigrated from the USSR, former USSR. And she is like this blonde, white beauty queen. And this is the face of Israel. This is how Israel wants to see itself. 9 years later, the first Israeli Arab beauty queen is being chosen. And she's not wearing a Bedouin embroidery or anything Muslim. She's wearing a Star of David. Why? She's not Jewish, but it's kind of being whitewashed into this melting pot of Israeli society. See, we're liberals enough to have an Arab Israeli beauty queen, but she does not look like an Israeli Arab beauty queen. She looks like an Israeli Jewish beauty queen, which is not who she really is. Beauty in pop culture also kind of got into high art with time. In the 80s, we have a magazine called Monitin, and Micha Kirchner was one of its leading photographers, and he took a portrait of Tami Ben-Ami, who was one of the leading models back then in the 80s. She's crying. I'm going to talk about this in a minute. And on the left, we see the cover of Israel's back then only art magazine, Studio, which is the very kind of conceptual, Western, very, very kind of intellectual art magazine. And this is the last cover of the editor back then, Sarah Breitberg Semmel. And it looks like I don't know, Harper's Bazaar or Elle or Vogue. It doesn't look like really an art magazine as we think about. And this breaking of boundaries between what is high art, conceptual, what is low art, fashion magazine for women, these boundaries kind of collapsed with this magazine, and this is a very iconic magazine. I'm not cover. I'm not just showing it because first of all, it was the last issue that she edited, but also it kind of it was the start of the end of this magazine and also of Israeli eliticism in the Israeli art. Because Israeli art wanted to be universal, it wanted to be conceptual, wanted to be American, wanted to be European. It didn't want to be Moroccan, or it didn't want to be Syrian or Lebanese. It wanted the artists to show at the MoMA and at the Pompidou and at the Tate. They didn't care about showing, I don't know, at the Museum of Modern Art in Morocco. This is just an example of how low culture or kitsch culture was embraced by high culture. Tami Ben-Ami, the portrait, is directly inspired by The Crying Boy, which is a very popular image, but also is considered to be a very kitschy image that you can see being sold at the central bus station in Tel Aviv and central bus stations everywhere, right? It's not considered to be high art, but it made kind of full circle when it became the cover of Edgar Keret, whom I'm sure that some of you know, if not all of you, on the cover of his book, Missing Kissinger. So, you know, high art, high literature by Edgar Keret, the low-brow art became kind of the cover of the high art literature. Miri Bouadana is Mizrahi. She's the daughter, of course, Tami Ben-Ami as well. Miri Bouadana, the model, is a Mizrahi. She's a daughter of Moroccan immigrants to Israel, also grew up in Sderot, in the periphery of Israel. And she's kind of a new, I would say, a Mona Lisa, or the new face of Israelism, marking the transformation in Israeli culture and how more and more Mizrahi are being seen in Israeli culture and are being accepted by the high art. For example, Studio Art magazine. Shlomi Saranga, who is kind of a borderline Mizrahi because he's Greek and he's kind of a Greek Israeli singer, singing in Greek taverns. Does he look like a Mizrahi, like the stereotypical Mizrahi? He is directly being referenced as a Greek god, a Greek white god. So again, a Western kind of perception of, and full circle with this new Jew. Israeli art is not just visual art, it's also, and the change actually, kind of the change of the Mizrahi and the overlooked actually became from, it happened from underneath. It didn't come from politicians or the system or the institutions. The change always comes from underneath. And what was considered to be Mizrahi music, like a cassette music, again, central bus station, highly popular, but you would not hear it on the radio. The radio is like good old Eretz Israel, you know, all sorts of ballads, but, you know, Silsulim and the Mizrahi music, it was considered to be very, very kind of inappropriate and very trashy. But with time, more and more Mizrahi singers became more and more popular until some would say they conquered or overtook the entire Israeli music industry, right? The chafla and the having a good time party music. Today, in a way, it's very similar to what happened to Afro-American hip hop and rap artists, you know, in America. They used to be kind of on the, you know, removed from society. And today, every successful artist needs to have a rapper or a hip hop artist in order to have a successful single or hit. So this is kind of, we start with Zohar Argov and then Ofra Chaza that gained international success, and then Oyal Golan and Sarit Haddad. So, you know, more and more Mizrahi again, Mizrahi Israeli culture that is kind of taking the stage after many, many years that they didn't have a stage. Or had a very peripheral stage. This is another iconic photograph in Israeli art history. It's by Meir Gal. And again, the way that politics and real life kind of enters art, it is called 9 out of 400, The West and the Rest. And this is from a history book, the kind of history books that was taught in the Israeli art system to that day, Kirschenbaum, written by Kirschenbaum. 9 pages out of 400, only 9 pages dealing with Mizrahi immigration to Israel. So out of all 400 pages of Zionism and European culture, European history and American history, only 9 pages dealt with a Mizrahi representation. And 13 years after, activist Ortal Ben-Dayan made this homage or tribute to Meir Gal when she took the new book that was published by the Israel Museum in Jerusalem after it was closed for renovation for a few years, or at least some of it was, for Igal Salmona, who was the chief curator of Israeli art, published this book, A Century of Israeli Art, from the collection of the museums. And Ortal Ben-Dayan showed that even now, at the year 2010, after the museum got, I don't know how many millions to kind of renovate the art and freshen up its collection, only 6 out of 200 are about Mizrahi artists in the collection, Mizrahi artists, and Mizrahi Israeli, of course. I think that we're running out of time, and I have some things to show. So I don't know if Rabbi Feinstein, if you want me to stop here or do you want me to continue? What should I do?
Well, by all means, let's continue. But let me just ask you a question as you go a little farther. So this revival of interest, or rather the birth of attention, the attention given to Mizrahim. All right. So one reason for that, of course, is because we live in that part of the world, and Israelis are now more comfortable. Is that the reason? More comfortable to see themselves as part of the Middle East rather than as transplanted from Europe? Or is it deeper than that? Is there really a sort of rejection of modernity, or sort of postmodern rejection of modernity, a turning away from the bourgeois values that the parents' generation brought, and to re-embrace something more original, more earthy, more vital, that comes from lower classes and more common kinds of art? You see the question? What motivates this new interest in Mizrahi art?
I can just answer you for an hour, because you associated modernism with Western, and modernism doesn't need to be Western or white or Ashkenazi. But I want to say that, you know, Israel is a complex society, and some are Ashkenazi and some are, you know, you used to have pure Ashkenazi and you used to have pure Mizrahi, pure Ashkenazi, pure Mizrahi. You know, with generations and with time, the Israelis are not as pure as they used to be 100 years ago or 80 years ago, right? You know, my father's family came from Afghanistan. My mother's family came from Poland and Russia. So it's already a blend. So, you know, people started blending, and there is no more, not everybody, but many or even most are half and half. Now, is it because of acceptance? I think that it's because people, artists, activists, political activists, people in the academy, you know, more and more Mizrahi are getting positions, leading positions in academy, right? They can get jobs in the academy. You know, the academies in Israel used to be Ashkenazi, the majority. So I think it's about not asking for permission and also being disappointed by the system, by the political system, by the system of judgment, by the system of social security, but all sorts of state systems that are supposed to ensure equality or fair treatment to all of its citizens. And they see that their culture is not being represented, or not represented enough, or not represented fairly, or not represented equally. And again, if I'm drawing parallel lines to what is happening in the United States, we can see it with Afro-Americans and we can see it with Latin Americans. It's not that their culture didn't exist. It's not like Afro-American culture didn't exist, even in like the high art fields, but it wasn't represented enough. It wasn't represented in collections of museums, of leading museums. It wasn't represented enough in TV, in cinema. You would see an Afro-American person, he would be a slave in cinema, he wouldn't be a successful lawyer. So, all these things, so the very long answer to your short question is people are less pure and more blended in Israel. And also, as I said, you're not going to tell me anymore what I can or cannot do, and I'm not going to wait for your permission to do what I want to do. I'm going to draw my own line and to draw the borders of where I want to be and what I want to do. So that's the shortest I could answer you.
Please, let's go on. This is
Okay. Okay, cool. So if we're going back to David Adika, the photographer who documented the portraits of the 4 leaders of the Black Panthers, again, around the year 2000, and I want to also emphasize internet things, something that we see, that is so obvious today, it wasn't obvious back then. And the internet really connected between silenced voices and people of marginal communities. Because someone from Sderot or Yerucham, might think, okay, this is only my personal case or my family's case of prejudice or mistreatment by the system. But the more you hear of people in other places that this was her baby, this Yemenite woman, her baby was kidnapped or disappeared or was told he was dead. You hear more and more stories. You gain power. You also have an outlet for frustration, and you have people to join you in channeling this frustration into an activist movement that can change society. So this is really with the emergence of the internet. David Adika again, on one hand, relating to a flag and also geometrical abstractions in modernism, right? We are conceptual, we are abstract, and on the other hand, it takes objects that are considered to be very domestic and very kind of ethnic, right? The white seeds of the watermelon and a towel from a kitchen. So on one hand, referring to his mother's and grandmother's kitchen, a domestic feminine space, and on the other hand, referring to the abstraction language of the art world. We get around, as I said, towards the year 2000 or the late 90s, more and more Mizrahi intellectuals are being seen, heard, they research more, they get published more. On the left, we can see Hakivun Mizrach, which is a magazine that is still around, and it is it's a leading voice to Mizrahi activism, poetry, academic research, art. So this is on the left. And on the right, we can see a self-portrait of Shula Keshet, who is the founder of Achoti movement or organization. It's a feminist Mizrahi organization of artists, social activists, Mizrahi women that again decided to join forces and not to be silenced again by society. Another example is Ars Poetica. Ars Poetica is a group about to celebrate 10 years, but they kind of fell apart a bit. It's a group of Mizrahi poets that in their poem refer to the discrimination that their parents and grandparents, their Mizrahi family, experienced in the state of Israel, in its first years or in the first decades. Actually, this movement kind of made Erez Biton, who is a kind of a veteran poet already, also a Mizrahi poet, kind of shed a light on him. And although he's been active for years, their activity and his importance to them kind of reframed his work as well. Ars, if you attended Tchelet Semel's lecture last week, Ars is because she talked about it, Ars is a derogatory Hebrew slang term for the Israeli stereotype of a low-class Mizrahi man who is vulgar in behavior and appearance. What does it mean? Circling back to who is Apollonian and who is Dionysian, the Dionysian is this one that cannot, is the untamed, that cannot control his behavior. This is the Ars. So they're reclaiming the term Ars and referencing art poetica, poets that deal with themselves, the term in literature. If we have time, I'm also going to talk about Lior Grady in a breakthrough solo exhibition that was called Natural Worker in 2016, dealt with this historical case of a group of Yemenites that lived in Kinneret by the Sea of Galilee, near Kibbutz Kinneret, where the poet Rachel lived, and that were kind of, they were there, they suffered a lot. I'm not going to get into it in depth, but they were kind of destined to be the cleaners and the maintenance people of the Ashkenazi residents of the kibbutz. And that is how he stained kind of with this gold liquid, all these cloths that mostly women, cleaned with at these homes. Is also referencing the misjustice that led to the removal of the Yemenites or their eviction in a way from the Kinneret to other places in Israel, especially Kfar Marmurek, because their neighbors in Kibbutz Kinneret, the Ashkenazi neighbors, didn't like their Yemenite neighbors. I actually wanted to show you this video by the curator of Israeli art at the Tel Aviv Museum, but I don't know if we have time for it. If anybody wants me to share the link in the chat, I can do it later. This is from, again, Natural Worker, coming full circle to Bezalel. And, what can these Yemenites do, right? These, these Jewish, Orthodox Jewish Yemenites that, they chew gut and they go to the synagogue and, they have no intellectual aspirations or, they're not qualified academically. What can they do? It's natural that there are going to be workers in the field, maybe after, all the other Israelis also, found other jobs or they work in cleaning. Again, we can draw all these parallel lines to American society and all societies where the hierarchy, accommodates white-skinned people at the top of the hierarchy and dark-skinned people at the bottom of the hierarchy. Part of reclaiming the skin color, this is a self-portrait by Orit Akta Ildesheim, which is actually in a collection in Beverly Hills, called El Dorado, the gold. And this is a reclamation of the skin tone because she is dusted in two kinds of dust, or so it seems, with white, how she was supposed to be kind of whitewashed or become Ashkenazi by Israeli society. On the other hand, like with gold dust that is very close to her own skin tone, therefore saying, my dark skin tone is not for me to be ashamed of. On the contrary, it is worthy as gold. Another self-portrait of the same artist, Orit Akta Ildesheim, and again referencing this exoticism towards the Yemenites and towards those that are not affected by modernism. This traditional Yemenite wedding gown, it's extremely heavy. So on one hand, it's traditional and it's beautiful that she carries her family's tradition and folklore. And on the other hand, it is hard for her to move in it. So therefore, her tradition kind of bounds her to be very limited by her role as a woman, as a wife, as a mother. And this is the last thing that I'm going to show you today. Again, coming full circle from Orientalism and the Women of Algeria by Delacroix. This is the contemporary artwork by Tamir Tzadok. He took Delacroix's Jewish wedding in Morocco and made a hybrid out of it. Therefore, he inserted real people and kind of made them disappear. So if Delacroix actually kind of created this historic, I don't know if maybe representation or a trace of a Jewish community that existed in Morocco, in Tamir Tzadok's video, they disappear. Why do they disappear? One reason is because the Jews moved to the state of Israel, and therefore there are less and less Jews in Morocco. But on the other hand, are there Jewish weddings, Moroccan Jewish weddings, being held in this manner in the state of Israel? Meaning, did they keep their tradition as they had it in Morocco? Or did it disappear not only from the painting, but from culture in general? So I'm going to, the video is only 2 minutes. Oh, it's here. Do you hear the sound? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Sagi. Could take off the screen sharing so we can see you. And thank you so very, very much for sharing this with us. It was just remarkable journey through Israeli art. Let me just ask you for a couple of just closing remarks. So when you look at the history that you just showed us, which was overwhelming, I'll go back and watch this recording again because it was so much to digest in an hour. So as you look at that history, you are in many ways the child of that history. You are the child of that cultural. What is the theme of this thing? What is the upshot of this? Is it an embracing of a diversity? Is it an enriching of the tapestry? Is it What did it reject? What did it accept? Give us a summary of the whole thing.
Wow. Yes, first of all, yes to the first two. Yes, I think that it's the understanding that the Zionism movement had good intentions, and the state of Israel, had good intentions.
I think we lost him. I think he'll come back in a moment. This is what happens when we depend on technology to teach us Torah. Let's give him just a second. I hope he comes back, because it was a brilliant lecture and a remarkable presentation. Well, he hasn't come back yet, I'm afraid. I'm so sorry. So I wanted to ask him some more questions. We'll just wait another moment. Maybe it'll come back. Maybe it'll come back. Well, I'm afraid we have lost Sagi Raphael, our teacher, and I apologize for that. I apologize for that.
He's back. So
Oh, is he
let's
back?
Did he come back? Did he go off and come back?
I have no idea. Can you hear me?
I can hear
There
you,
he
but
is.
where are you? I have to see you.
I don't know what happened.
It's what
We
happens when
lost
we.
you. Do you want me to, let's see, hold on.
Oh, there you
I'm
are.
right here.
There you are. I got you. I got you.
Can you
I
hear
got you.
me?
Yes.
I'm adding the spotlight. There we go.
Okay. I don't know what happened. So yes to the first two. What I said is that the Zionist movement and the state of Israel and the entire Zionist idea, it had good intentions, but with good intentions, sometimes some people get hurt or get affected on the way, and some people are not being part of the circle or of the club that is making decisions, even when it comes to them, decisions that affect them. So I think that one take of me or by me or is that a melting pot is, even if it had a good intentions, maybe it's not a great idea because everybody is different. And you cannot expect anybody to be the same or identical to someone else. So even if the idea was to create a new Israeli or a new Jew or an American or, a very monolithic identity, it's a bad idea. So I think that what we take from this is that Israelis and just human beings are some of this and some of this and some of that, and can be that and can be that, and it's not to put anybody in a box, not a person and not a nationality and not a culture and not a state, okay, and not the citizens of a state. I also think that with years and the more Israel is being exposed and Israelis are being exposed to other countries, for example, now with Dubai and the Emirates, I think that there is also fascination by these places, or Morocco or Tunisia. Those places that when I grew up in Israel, it was, these are our enemies. There is no chance that it's going to be peace with them. They want to kill us, and they are savages. And we don't want to be anything like them. We don't want anything to do with them. And we better look at the United States, where we have our brothers, the American Jews, and we better look at the intellectuals in Europe and not try and socialize with our neighbors because they are not worthy. We are better than them. And I think that with the internet and with all sorts of reasons, exposure to Arab culture, music, movies, and also people, these grandkids of people that came from Morocco and that came from Yemen, they want to understand their families' traditions and heritage and legacy. And again, there is kind of mistrust in systems. So I'm not going to listen to those systems And I'm going to figure out for myself. I'm going to contact someone on Facebook from Tunisia, from Morocco, or from Dubai, or from Iran. And I'm going to connect with the person and not wait for my prime minister to do it for me, because he might not do it. So, the more we progress, I think, the more we understand that life is not black and white, and Israel is not black and white. And there are so many shades and so many nuances that the more time progresses, the more we acknowledge these nuances. And I think that Israeli art, you didn't get to see a lot of it tonight, but I think that, art and artists really don't look at the stereotypes. They look at nuances of people, of behaviors, of subcultures, and not just mainstream culture. And, and they just make the fabric of society richer.
Let me ask you one more sort of substance question, and then I think I'll ask you a concluding one. So the great philosopher Ahad Ha'am said that the galut, the exile, was detrimental, was poisonous to the cultural conversation of the world. We were isolated and couldn't speak to other cultures. Well, now we come to Eretz Yisrael. We come to Medinat Yisrael, to the state of Israel, and we have these wonderful artists who are borrowing artistic forms from outside. And you've talked to us about what that says about Israel. So let me ask you the broader question. What does it say about being a Jew? What does Israeli art teach me about being a Jew that an American Jew doesn't see? Or that because we don't have much of a Jewish artistic tradition in America, the way that there's a Jewish artistic tradition in Israel. Could you help me understand that?
First of all, I am not sure that it's true, because I think that American Jews in the United States might be more concerned with their Jewish identity than the Jewish artists in Israel, because it's almost a non-issue for most secular Jewish artists in Israel. But I must say that, again, it connects to what I said about Israelis. Don't tell me what to do and don't set the boundaries for me. In the last, I would say 15 years, maybe 20 years, there is a shift in in Israeli culture, when especially Orthodox, not ultra-Orthodox, but Orthodox women artists, I would call some of them even feminists, deal with their work directly with Judaism, with Jewish laws, with with those quotes and chapters that tell them you should not do this, you should not do that, you should only be this, you should only do that. And they deal with it in their work. I can also tell you that not just in visual art, meaning painting or sculpture or video, you can also have schools that their students are religious Jews, and they make movies, they make successful movies. In Betzalel, they have a Haredi extension. They invited me, I was in Israel last summer, and I was invited to be kind of a critique for their graduation show. And their exhibition was amazing, better than other graduation shows that I've seen in Los Angeles and in Tel Aviv and in other places in Israel. So, and why is that? Because Israelis wanted to be international. They didn't want to be the Jew from the diaspora. They didn't want to be Jewish. They didn't want to be seen as the stereotypical Jew. They wanted to be international. But when you feel already comfortable in the place where you are, again, it also has to do with the generations, then you can start digging into your identity, into your family, and say, wait a minute, why do I need to be ashamed of me being a religious Jew? I can be a feminist and a woman and Jewish and not be ashamed of it, and also show you that I'm not what you think I am. I'm more sophisticated and I'm more daring than what you think.
It's wonderful. There was an image that you showed us just, I think, 2/3 of the way through the show of a model of a woman a woman whose skin was a bit dark. She was wearing a white T-shirt with a
Right.
star
Boadana.
and the tattoo on the shoulder. And if you look at that as an interesting image of modern Jew, vital, powerful, not necessarily white skin Western, much more Eastern. And the tattoo bespeaks a notion of that vitality is always tied to transgression. That if you're going to have vitality, you're going to have people who cross boundaries. They're going to be considered sinners in certain people's eyes, but that's the vitality of the thing. And the way she's looking directly at us in that shot, meaning she's not afraid, she's not looking away, you know, she's not ashamed, she's not embarrassed, she's not scared, she doesn't need to be sheltered. This is a woman who can take care of herself. It's a very, very powerful image of Jew, if you look, not just Israeli, but of a Jewish image. So tell us quickly what's next week going to be. You're coming with us next week, and we want to continue this beautiful journey. So tell us what we're doing next week.
Okay, so next week is actually going to be kind of chapter 2 of the rise of the overlooked, because today I only dealt with the Mizrahi representation and kind of the rise of the Mizrahi voice, really in a nutshell, because, you know, there's an entire, I can talk about it for, you know, many more hours. But next week, I'm going to talk about several other groups in Israeli culture, Israeli Arabs, Israeli Ethiopians, and Israeli Russians. So, you know, the two major aliyot, the two major kind of immigration waves from the former USSR and from Ethiopia, and those that were already in Israel, the Arabs, or those that, you know, have a Palestinian heritage and history, and how these three groups gain more and more and are gaining and getting more and more recognition by the institutions and, you know, artistic institutions and in general, and more visibility in pop culture, more visibility in cinema, in TV, in literature, in magazines, in alternative scenes, and also in museums, and they get awards, and they get, you know, international collectors buying their work, and they get representation by international galleries. So all of this next week.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to Yona Goldberg for her wonderful, wonderful introduction and her wonderful guidance and wisdom in putting this session together. Thank you to Alana Zimmerman, my partner at Valley Beth Shalom, and Jackie Singer, who's our communications director, for making all this possible. And to everyone, as they say on television, please stay tuned next week, Wednesday night, 7 o'clock, right here on Zoom, Facebook, YouTube, wherever you find us. Mr. Raphael will continue his presentation on the development of Israeli art. We will post this session sometime soon, I hope. So if you'd like to go back over it and look at the slides once again, which I really recommend you do, because there was so much to digest this evening, it'll be very worthwhile. And thank you so much for joining us. And let's continue our journey through Israeli culture. Just so for a program note so that everyone can follow, next week we'll have Sagi Raphael, our wonderful guide through Israeli art. And then we're going to turn to the world of Israeli music. And our guest will be Mr. Dani Massing, who is an Israeli musician. He was a television star when he was a kid. He's been singing all over the world, and he'll be a guide for us through the Israeli identity through music. And then we're going to turn to Israeli literature, film, and television. So thank you for being with us. And thank you for sharing this time with us. And Alana, are you waving at me or just saying good night? Then I want to thank everyone for
everybody.
Good. Have a very good night. Everybody, please take good
And
care of
thank you.
yourselves. Stay warm, and we'll see you next week. Sagi, toda rabba. Thank you so very
Thank you
much.
so much.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you.
Boy, was that great.
Amazing.
You
Is
can't buy that.
Jonathan D still on? Jonathan D. Just so some of you know, we've had a little mistake with some of the links. We send out an e-blast on Monday, and then next week on Wednesday before the presentation with the correct link. So please don't use any old emails. Going forward, we'll use the same link, but it's this one, and we'll send out in the e-blast next week that link. Okay, thank you. Sorry for any confusion.
Good night, everyone.